Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, the 8th of February 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we are delighted to say we're joined by Alex Thomson with his Eastern Approaches report from Holland, the Netherlands, I should say. And also we got Mark Anderson, American Free Press, and Truth Hound blogger. So we should have a particularly good news today. I will say it's pretty cold here in Plymouth, certainly for dog walking. Other people around the country are saying it's pretty cold and chilly. But the good news is that the BBC seems to think that there's been no fake news anywhere for 6 days. And that headline, which we've just put up, may indeed be incorrect. It may now be 7 days. But I'll just draw your attention to a tweet that I put out this morning. My goodness, despite all the furore by at BBC News, at BBC Reality Check about fake news everywhere for 6 whole days, well, they've done nothing. So no fake news. And just to prove that this is reality, this is not fake news that we're reporting. This is a snapshot of the Reality Check website. And that was the 1st of February. And then the next time it pops up, it should come up here. Come on, here we go. 7th of February. So missing days, Mike, where apparently there was no fake news anywhere in the world. It's encouraging, isn't it?
Very encouraging, very. Well, we'll bring Mark Anderson in at this point straight away. Mark, you wanted us to highlight this article from Patrick Henningsen's 21st Century Wire, because obviously he's running a fake news week this week as well, exposing the mainstream consensus reality complex. So give us a bit of background to this.
The main thing I wanted to highlight, Mike, was our partner, Patrick Henningsen, who runs 21stcenturywire.com, is, he's doing what you guys are doing. I'm mainly pointing out that this is going on both sides of the big pond, to point out the duplicity of the big media and the way they form these false narratives. This is kind of the cover article at 21stcenturywire.com, and Patrick very ably explains in an overview fashion what's going wrong with the media, the way it goes about framing issues in such a misleading manner. And so I just really wanted to point this out as sort of a primer for today's discussion, since we're all talking about the actual fake news of the mainstream media. And this article just goes a long way in laying the groundwork for what we're dealing with this week, just like what Patrick is dealing with. So that's what it is, really. It's sort of the starting gun, if you will, of today's discussion. Okay,
Mark, thank you very much. Now, Alex, we'll come straight into this then. This is from CBN News. And you, in the show notes, you have captioned as Sudan, another test bed for social policy. And the quote is that you're saying that a kangaroo court has found this gentleman, Mr. Yasik, guilty of entering the country without a visa, spying, taking pictures of military installations, inciting hatred, and publishing fake news. That's according to his lawyer. So give us the background to this then.
Well, it depends really on who one asks, Mike, but it appears that Mr. Yasik is a well-established Christian missionary from the Czech Republic, and he was based in South Sudan, a country which has been independent for a handful of years now, and which has had problems with breaking away from Sudan and another war or turmoil since. And in fact, the Rump Sudan, the Islamic north of the country, has had the same problems. But there he was in the black animist stroke Christian country of South Sudan, an independent state now, and he seems to have found himself at some kind of workshop. It may be that he didn't observe visa requirements, but Sudan is one of those countries that actually criminalizes crossing the border. If you enter a Western country or an advanced country anywhere illegally, you will be deported as an illegal alien and you may be forbidden re-entry, but you will not be tried in courts for the matter. Sudan, in many ways, although we've been told it's a very nasty, backward country, seems to be one of these laboratories, these awful regimes that are used as laboratories for social policy that the West would like to introduce. So the crime of sowing hate, inciting hatred, which is something you see in Germany and Sweden as an ultra-modern right-on Marxist crime, also appears in so-called backwards Islamic Arabic Sudan. although it was never there traditionally as a crime. The crime of spreading fake news. This is also all according to Mr. Yashik's lawyer. Fake news may refer to the fact that he held a symposium or workshop with some local people in Sudan. And these are crimes that have got him 2 decades behind bars. Now, Sudan does put on a show sometimes. For example, there was the case of the teddy bear named Mohammed by a class taught by a British teacher in Sudan, and she had charges incited against her as a way of getting back at Britain, and was then let off quietly. But this seems to be a serious measure, and pretty much as with Nepal, for example, which has had a Marxist government for a few years now, they go actually ahead of the West and try out certain policies, such as you may not preach, you may not speak your mind. I think almost as if the West is with its Marxist fellow travellers in the West, is trying them out to see how they could be introduced in Europe. I'm not suggesting we would overnight find people getting 20 years in prison for fake news in Britain and America, but it seems to be the way the wind is blowing.
Sudan, of course, a recipient of Department for International Development money, and so the question in my mind is the whole situation with the split in Sudan. How much influence, how much subversion has there been from Britain in that?
I would say 120 years of subversion, going back to the time of the Mahdi. A very good friend of mine did a research paper once for an American group on what was going on with Britain in the late Victorian era with Sudan. And of course, there was this famous episode known in Dad's Army episodes as the Fighting the Fuzzy Wuzzies, or the Mad Mahdi. Well, that really happened. General Gordon really did go and march into Khartoum in 1885. And ever since then, the south of Sudan, which, as I say, has just been split off, a bit like Kosovo has been split off from Serbia, has got very interesting hydrocarbon and mineral interests. Yes, there was persecution of blacks in the south and west of the full Sudan before it split. The Darfur issue has come to the fore, and DFID's been very involved in that. But without saying that those crimes didn't exist, I would say that they were a kind of establishment fake news, because I think clearly Western interests wanted to get hold of, particularly, I think, some of the diamond and oil interests. There's been a long process of Britain being involved here in the Netherlands, actually, at The Hague, at the Peace Palace, in trying to delineate the border between Sudan and South Sudan, and Sudan and other of its neighbours, so as to take off as much of the oil-rich ground as possible into pro-Western concessions. So I think that's why Sudan has had bombing going back to Clinton, in fact, and equivalent UK diplomatic targeting. It's not worse than other countries. It just happens to be sitting on more wealth.
Yes, okay, right. Thank you very much for that. Now, President Trump then, this is a piece of fake news for Fake News Week from the BBC, who claimed that there was no factual basis for discrimination against Syrian Christians. Just tell us what's going on here. Trump making a statement saying that Syrian Christians have been horribly treated. Do you know, if you were a Christian in Syria, it was impossible, at least very tough, to get into the United States?
And for saying this entirely factual thing, Mr. Trump got himself up to the top of the queue on BBC TV News, where the New York correspondent said that this was a statement without factual basis.
We have the quote there. He said in an interview with an evangelical television network, Trump claimed without any factual basis the old Obama policy favored Muslims over Christians.
Yes, well, I mean, this has been taken apart, particularly by the Barnabas Fund, itself, by the way, victim of some very interesting political targeting. Its director, Dr. Patrick Soukhdeo, found himself arrested at Heathrow for an alleged historic incidents of harassment. They didn't wait till he got back to his home in Wiltshire. They arrested him at Heathrow for show, and he was then edged out. But the trustees of that Barnabas Fund actually issued a very angry statement. So they're well aware of British and American government hostility towards them, because they point out untoward things about the way that certain religious minorities are treated in the world. And here you see on the next slide their rebuttal of it. And you can see, if you go to that page itself, called US Government and UN Guilty of Massive Institutional Discrimination against Christian
Alex, Alex, that's not the rebuttal, because that's actually the article from October or September last year. So this is during the Obama administration. So this is giving the numbers. So what we're showing here is that, in fact, they had published prior art, as it were, on this.
Correct, Mike. This had been well established in the closing months of the Obama administration. This slide we're seeing on screen here, on this part of the Barnabas Fund website, that the numbers of Christians, who are a very substantial minority in Syria, there's 12 historic Christian denominations in Syria, and they make up around 10% of the population. There were just handfuls, single digits of Syrian Christians being accepted, and the fault was not primarily with the US and UK themselves as governments, but more that they were allowing UN agencies to filter people out in the field in countries like Turkey and say, well, you're persecuted and you're not, and a very hostile manner, and obviously almost stoking the feeling that only Sunni Muslims were being favoritized, although they themselves probably were not wanting that. It was a question of what the UN was doing in the name of Western countries, and a link to that is the rebuttal which they provide in the Barnabas Fund do in their latest piece responding to this. So the BBC News just wants to take it from them. Wants us to take it from them that there was no evidence for the idea that Syrian Christians had it hard trying to get into the US, but President Trump was absolutely right to say that they did have it hard.
And just to put a graphic on that, I believe that's from the same article.
That's from another news source, actually, so that there's been multiple sources. CBS News and others, Fox News, have all published on these figures using statistics from refugee organizations.
And so what that's quite clearly showing is that religious denominations of the 10,801 Syrian refugees who've been admitted into the United States since the Obama administration's announcement to admit 10,000 Syrian refugees for the full year 2016. And that was released on September the 10th, 2015. And it's showing there that Sunni Muslims, over 10,000, other Muslim denominations, 90, Christians, 29. I mean, that's pretty definitive.
It's pretty definitive. And again, I cannot see that this is the fault of any body of Sunni Muslims in Syria or of the Sunni Muslims getting into the refugee queue, trying to pay their way out or pay their way to the top of the queue or anything. That may have gone on in individual instances. But I think the systemic bias, which there very clearly is there, because we're 2 orders of magnitude distinct there from what the population ratio is, that's clearly coming from UN agencies on the front line and being accepted silently by Western governments.
What's interesting for me on this one, Alex, is that Vanessa Beeley, who we were speaking to yesterday, says very clearly that if you speak to Syrians, they say first and foremost they are Syrian. They're not talking about what religion they are. And I think that statement from Vanessa, which I'm absolutely sure is true, adds weight to what you're saying, that the fragmentation of these people, the screening out, the bias, is coming in at a later stage. It's not there in Syrian society, but when these people have fled, migrated, whatever's taken place, that's when this bias is injected.
That's absolutely right, Brian, and you're quite correct to be certain Vanessa's telling the truth there. I was in Syria 2007, but I've also read up on its history quite a lot. People tend to forget now it was a Ba'ath, so that's a secularist, almost socialist Arab nationalist state for decades, as was Iraq. It was united with Egypt in the post-Nasser area for a while, in the 50s and 60s, as the United Arab Republic. They had decades of light Soviet-style state socialism, and a kind of more progressive variant of it, really. And yes, whichever form of the 12 historic Christian denominations you were from, or historic Sunni allegiance or Alawi, that was never asked about. There was a Shia minority and a Jewish minority and a Druze minority, which did have more political problems in the south of the country. But if there was any extremism or religious identity in the country, it was with those people and not with the Sunni Muslims or the Christians. So now this has clearly been stoked to a great degree that we haven't seen before. And Syria does strike you, if you meet Syrians abroad as well, as a country where people are much more focused on national identity than on religious ones.
Yeah. Mark, the coverage of Donald Trump in the UK is really reaching hysterical levels. Is he getting a more favourable or a more honest appraisal by the press in the United States?
Generally, no. There's very few exceptions to that, too. What it is here, it's a very hyperactive, keep poking at Donald Trump every moment kind of approach. Every tweet he makes, although he could lay off on the Twitter a little bit to be sure, every tweet he makes, every statement he makes, every policy he entertains, every executive order he signs is greeted with scorn and ridicule for the most part. And Roger Stone was on the Charlie Rose show last night, I'll mention in passing. And like Roger Stone, whether you like him or not, he's a very, enigmatic kind of figure, a bit of a libertine, they say. But he goes back to the Nixon White House, and he explained that Donald Trump is his own man, like him or not. He's nobody's marionette. And he's trying to do what Washington is not used to seeing, and that's to actually carry out the policies that he promised the voters during the campaign. You may not like the policies. We may not like the policies, but this is the thing. The press, like the Washington establishment, because they're an integral part of that establishment, the press is having a hard time dealing with someone that is actually following through on what he said he would do. And we can all weigh the merits and demerits of his actual policies, and we do that on this show. But that's the thing. They're having to deal with someone that's got a lot of assertiveness. And so the press coverage is pretty hostile overall, but skeptical in the wrong way, and not skeptical in the healthy way.
Yeah. Okay, and Alex, let's bring this one up on screen. This is a fascinating quote from Donald Trump. We are human beings with souls. Our republic was formed on the basis that freedom is not a gift from government, but the freedom is a gift from God. This is a pretty unique statement, as far as I'm aware, in the political circles.
It's funny, isn't it, Mike? Because if you look at the other English-speaking democracies, Canada, the United Kingdom, well, certainly the England and Wales jurisdiction, and Australia all have established Anglicanism to some degree. I know less so in Canada and Australia, but they have their political culture is supposedly Anglican. What we're told inside and outside America in schooling is usually that America has a fierce separation of church and state, and yet it is precisely a U.S. president, and in fact one who was only raised Christian. He makes no pretense to be an active or committed Christian. He's the one who's now saying that America is about God-given rights, and that freedom is given by God, not government. Of course, what he means by that, which infuriates his enemies, is that if what government didn't grant, government cannot curtail or take away, because these are given by the Creator for life. He's entirely in keeping, of course, with the preamble and the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights in saying so. And this was uttered at the National Prayer Breakfast on the 2nd of February. Well worth going to watch that, particularly the Senate chaplain's sermonette, but also Mr. Trump's own remarks there. So I can expect that he'll get a lot of mud slung at him for that, because he's led the way in saying another unsayable thing in the 21st century West, which is that government is not God.
Indeed, and of course this is a long-held principle forgotten by the British government as well.
Yeah, it's a long time. We see this in waves. I mean, for example, the National Prayer Breakfast, which Mr. Trump was speaking at, was an institution of the post-war period by President Eisenhower, and it was itself a reaction, together with the adding of the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance, one nation under God, indivisible. These were reactions to the high watermark of secularism in the 30s and 40s, which came from Britain, actually. In Britain and America, you had policymakers at that time saying religion is a private matter. There'll be no more reference to God from now on. Thank you very much. And that seems to have lasted for quite some time. And then by degrees, Reagan and Thatcher to some extent, and now Mr. Trump, it's been rolled back, but not in a kind of encroachment of neo-fundamentalism. As I say, he's not a committed Christian. It's simply a return to the historic pre-early 20th century understanding of what Anglo-American government is.
Yes. Okay. Well, let's look at Foreign Policy magazine. 13 international relations buzzwords that need to get taken to the woodshed. Alex, what on earth is going on here? Let's just put the statements up, or the phrases up that we're not allowed to use anymore. So we're not allowed to say global citizen, the international community, smart power, the right of self-determination, freedom fighter, superpower. What's going on here?
Well, I'd hope to bring Mark here in a moment in because of the man who is saying them. It is, in fact, none other than the CFR boss who is saying that we need to lose these buzzwords. I'm just getting his byline up on screen as I speak, but it's coming out of the Council on Foreign Relations, which, of course, is the American arm of the Anglo-American globalist movement, as it were. Just looking at the page here. But let's look at the words first. We're not allowed to say global citizen. Fair enough. That's a nonsense anyway. We're not allowed to say the international community. Well, if the CFR is saying that we can't say that anymore, then it's an admission of defeat that such a thing never existed. It was just a few special interests in London and New York and Washington taking the world for a ride. Smart power. We've shown up on the UK column what that is, and we actually now have first sea lords at the Navy. saying that Britain has soft power, but that's almost the same thing as smart power. And this is a very worrying one. We're rolling back the idea going back to Woodrow Wilson in the post-First World War era that nations have the right to self-determination. And if you read what is said here, it is that the reason why we can't say that anymore is because if you have any new nations asserting their sovereignty, then they're going to have to be carved out of existing nations. So it's almost as if we have to say the international order is frozen in time. There is no more possibility for a nation to become independent. So I do see a sense here that the gloves are off. A lot of these buzzwords dated from the post-1991 era, like the surgical strike nonsense and America as the sole superpower. But some of them goes back, as I say, right back to the First World War. And I sense an overturning of much of the older order going on here. I'm just going to hand over to Mark actually on this, because it's the fact that it's come out of the CFR, which is interesting me particularly.
So Mark, have you any thoughts?
I want to make sure I understand. This is by Richard Haas?
Correct. That was the name I was looking for.
Oh, okay. Now, is he saying that the international establishment will not use these words, or is he simply saying that the press and the people should try and avoid these buzz phrases and these words? Who's not supposed to say them?
I think, Mark, you might be closer to the truth there with the second one, because what he's saying is we would be doing better without using these phrases. This is the unstated we. He's not saying that the CFR will stop using them, although it's written under his name. He's simply saying that that we, as a vague, undefined entity, should stop using these phrases.
Oh, okay, I get it now. Yeah, this is very instructive. This means that more and more people in the perception of the CFR are catching on to their agenda. And if they use these words too liberally, there we go, I'm already wandering into their forbidden zone, then more and more people on top of who already catches on will catch on. They're afraid of kind of a landslide of public awareness. I go to a lot of these people's meetings in person when I get a chance, the more open ones, because they're required by the tax code. The CFR and related groups, they're required by the tax code to have a certain number of their meetings open in order to have tax exempt status. So I've been to a number of their programs, and this whole idea of the post-World War II rules-based liberal neo-capitalist order, all these things coming out of the Bretton Woods Agreement, the WTO, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, this is their goose that lays the golden egg for the plutocrats, for the oligarchs. And they don't want that goose to be scoured or skewed or put upon the rotisserie by the populace. So they're obviously very nervous that if they're too loose with their tongues with these kind of phrases and this kind of verbiage, that the entire house of cards is going to fall down. Right now, it's on very shaky ground, and these tremors are caused by Brexit, even though Brexit is very tentative, and the Trump campaign and Trump's election. They feel the tremors. The tremors are getting stronger on the Richter scale. So this is very encouraging in a way to see this in that sense, that they fear that the walls of their castle are being breached.
I'll just read out to you, Mark, what he says at the very end, Mr. Haas, H-A-A-S, for those who want to look it up, Richard Haas. His final no-no phrase is the liberal democratic order. And he says it's a common description used by academics and wonks, which are policy people, to describe the post-World War II world. So there you see, he's talking about the 20th century again. What comes to mind is the Holy Roman Empire of the Middle Ages. Alas, the liberal democratic order, says Richard Haas, is no longer liberal, democratic, or orderly, if only because the world is not. And then he signs off his piece by saying, there you have it. I doubt relegating these words and phrases to the dustbin of history would result in world peace, another phrase that should be abolished, but it would be a useful start. End of article. So I think we see more of his intentions there.
That's very strange.
Okay.
Go ahead, Brian.
I'll just bring in here, sorry, Mark, I'll just bring in here, if I may. I think, Mark, your analysis is absolutely excellent. They are worried, these people are really worried that the general public, ordinary people, are now starting to read into their documents the real meaning that they're putting across. And a lot of these buzzwords and phrases that people just allowed to drift in one ear and out the other without really taking on board what they meant, people are now picking up on what they mean. So he's saying we've got to get rid of these phrases because we're being exposed. And I just wanted to add to it, it's very interesting that over the last couple of days I've been speaking to David Scott on the subject of language being used by the Scottish Nationalist Party, SNP. And the conclusion that he's come to is that the whole meanings have been changed. The SNP is using particular language. You hear the word, you think you know what they're talking about, but actually within their political, I'm going to use cult with a very small c, within their political circles, these words have completely different meaning. And I have a feeling that to actually fight this very dominating world regime that's clearly trying to install itself as world government, we are going to need to do a lot more work on language, how language is being used, and how we can also use language in order to overturn and undermine what they're doing.
Okay, we'll move on. Alex, this is the London Review of Books. Is there a realization that there's been a bit of fake news around Syria then?
I think there is, at least in the form of this author, Patrick Cockburn, who is asking really how the Western media was taken for a ride in Syria. Or on Syria, I should say, because one of his main points is he doesn't bang it, but he's painfully aware that the Western journalists didn't actually have a presence in Syria, nor did Western politicians. They had a few diplomats and aid agencies on the ground, but other than that, the nearest reporting, as Vanessa Beeley said at the BCG conference last November, was from Diyarbakir and other such places in eastern Turkey, if not from Lebanon or even Britain. So he's in a sort of sour, disappointed tone, which I can well understand. Patrick Cockburn is saying, well, who was actually checking what was coming out of Syria? And particularly when we saw all these scare stories and Help Save Aleppo Now banners coming out, did anyone actually have any way of verifying what was being said in East Aleppo? Were these unprecedented acts of butchery actually taking place, he writes, or were they actually just ways of cynical terrorists, perhaps backed and funded by the West, for getting their way? Because of the naivety of the Western population, particularly when you're told that children or animals are suffering, for example. So I think Patrick Cockburn has really he's broken a lance here for something that we will probably see becoming much more widespread in the serious end of the, I would say, the journalists' press, the titles that the journalists themselves read, of which the London Review of Books is one, in which the echo chamber finally admits to itself by degrees that, yes, we were had.
And was he asking or suggesting who it was that was pulling the wool over their eyes, as it were?
He hasn't actually. He's just talking about the fact that the most credibility came from the spokesman for the UN High Commission for Human Rights, the UNHCR. So, in a sense, he is fingering Mr. Rupert Colville as the spokesman of the UNHCR as the most, or the highly placed, shall we say, of the people who echoed these false claims, perhaps willfully coming out of East Aleppo or not coming out of East Aleppo and claiming to come from.
Okay, well, let's look at some more fake news. Now, one of the things I'd like to get your view on, Alex, is where does a spun story become a fake story? And this story about homeschooling, the headline in the Mirror here from a few days ago is Mum homeschools her children by letting them play computer games for 7 hours a day. And the implication from the headline is that, of course, this is typical of homeschooling, which, of course, it absolutely isn't. So you've suggested this is an attack on homeschooling, a hatchet job, as you put it in your comments to me earlier. So where is the limit between something which is spin and something which is just blatantly fake?
I think it has to be in the elements of sourcing and balance. If you're doing journalism properly, you get things from two sources. So in this case, you would talk to two homeschooling families at a minimum for an article, even for a mid-market paper like the Mirror. That used to be standard. You would give right to reply. Here on the continent, they go a step further and submit the copy to the interview subject before it gets published. That we regard that in English-speaking countries as two-toadying, but you can see where they get that ethic from. You need to give a right to reply, and you need to have some kind of analysis of what the logical geniuses of the past always used to call present your opponent's best argument. So present the best will in the world view of why someone that you don't like, in this case a homeschooling mother, is doing what she's doing. None of those elements are present here, and therefore I would say that it is spin or fake news. She's clearly being flown, as it were, as an example of what these awful homeschoolers will do if they're allowed to get away with it. And I would like to know which interests are behind this story, and why, particularly at this time, we have seen intermittent attacks on homeschoolers in various jurisdictions of the UK, perhaps particularly Scotland, but also England and Wales. And of course, in the US, where it wasn't even established in all states as a legal and inalienable right until about the 1980s, through the banding together of a few homeschoolers in legal associations. Perhaps Mark has some thoughts on how homeschooling is being particularly got at, shall we say, in the more Democrat-supporting states in the US.
Yeah.
Well, I've got to come in here and say I believe that really what's going on is that the fake news agenda is closely tied in with controls everywhere. I just wanted to recap here on what's happening and to bring in some news that one of our viewers has picked up on. So let's have a look at the government's attack on the media. And we're just going to remind people, do not forget about the Leveson inquiry, because that was a very, very powerful attempt to get complete control of the mainstream press and media. And as Mike corrected me on the other day, it was a lot of the overwhelmingly UK columns research into common purposes involvement in this that then appeared in the Daily Mail and other newspapers. But let's bring in, we've now got the government inquiry. It says it's impartial, but we'll speak about the man in question. And this is one of the articles that's up on the UK column website, so you can have a look there. And then this is the document that we were alerted to, protection of official data. So the Law Commission looking into what happens with whistleblowers where official data is concerned. We'll look at that in a little more detail in just a second, but I've labelled that intimidate and attack whistleblowers because I think where it's going. And then, of course, we can bring in the BBC News and Channel 4 as examples where the government is going to protect its own media. But here's the bit that the chairman of that inquiry into fake news is an ex-Saatchi and Saatchi man. So an organisation that's worked with the Conservative government since 1978, that might be, certainly 1979. And what was their job? To spin truth in order to help get the Tories into power. So this is the document here. And what it's really saying is what we've put in as the title, Government Best Placed to Decide What We Should Know. And if you get into the document itself, it's basically saying that a whistleblower is not the best person to judge whether something should be in the public interest. And if they reveal something that's part of the government's secret, then the government says the damage is already done because that information has come out into the public. So the end here is our provisional conclusion is that the public interest is better served by providing a scheme permitting someone who has concerns about their work to bring it to the attention of the, quote, independent investigatory powers commissioner who would have statutory abilities to conduct an investigation and report. So you're a whistleblower, you want to get the lid off wrongdoing. The government says, well, you come and talk to our man and tell him everything you know, and then he'll decide whether the public needs to know that. I don't get a good feeling about this, Mike. No. I think I know where this is going. And let's have a look at some examples as to what the government does with whistleblowers. This is very, very basic to show, but of course, we've got Melanie Shaw, child abuse whistleblower. What's the government do to keep her quiet? Simply puts her in prison. We've got a Met Police whistleblower. He's accused. He's branded and regarded as being mentally ill for a while. Then he's suspended, harassed, bullied, and nothing follows up. Now I'm going to bring in, and with that, her name drops out of my head.
Lowell Goddard.
Thank you very much. Ms. Goddard, because of course Ms. Goddard was vilified in the press when she stepped down from the child abuse inquiry. but we have been told on very good authority that her problems started when she asked for the official intelligence files on Mr. Janner and Mr. Brinton. And so it's the evidence is growing that this lady was actually forced out when she dug too deeply. And then we've got Carol Woods, the senior social worker. She was harassed, threatened, sacked from her job when she tried to expose child stealing. So against that, as a tiny background, a lot more evidence. Would we trust the government to monitor whistleblowers? Well, here is Brandon Lewis. He's the police minister. When he was told about our Met Police whistleblower, he didn't want to know.
No.
So keep it in the club and keep it quiet. And we'll just remind people here, we've had a lot of very good comments about our analysis onto the state of Channel 4, the fact that it's controlled by the government through the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. And we'd also pointed out that we've got executive members appointed by Ofcom. Now, we had a chat this morning with some very nice gentlemen who are Ofcom media people, and we asked some questions. How could you be independent as a media organisation when Ofcom, the body that regulates you, actually appoints your staff? Very interesting areas of discussion. Ofcom's reply was, well, we have a code of standards, a code of ethics, and everybody follows that. I'm not so sure, so I think we've got a little more digging to do. But if you're not aware, when you watch Channel 4, the government says it controls it as a company, and that's within the government's own documentation.
Yes. Now, seagulls, Brian, seagulls, really important. We're going to show a little video clip here. And the first voice you're going to hear on that is the voice of BBC Radio 4's Today presenter Sarah Montague. But if you're watching this as opposed to listening it, you'll also on screen see Devon MP Gary Streeter, who was chairing a debate on the issue of seagulls in Westminster Hall yesterday. And he is straight away followed by Oliver Colville, who's Plymouth MP, not only worried about hedgehogs, Brian, but he's now also worried about seagulls. And we're going to hear from Conservative MP Anne-Marie Trevelyan in this clip. But it's the question asked by Sarah Montague at the end of this video which really piqued my interest. So watch this and then we'll discuss what Sarah Montague was asking.
A scourge of seagulls, serious enough to see the people of Berwick-upon-Tweed trying to shoot them down.
That brings a really important discussion today. In Berwick-upon-Tweed, the most northerly town of my constituency, we are plagued with the seagull problem, to the point that last summer someone took upon themselves to institute their own cull, which, whilst appreciated in some quarters, brought the risk that people are having to take the law into their own hands to deal with these really difficult and aggressive birds, which means there are people wandering the streets of Berwick with firearms who really shouldn't be doing so.
Dr. Mark Nason is Director of Science at the Cornwall College Group, and he's in our Truro studio. Good morning.
Good morning.
Is there something particularly extreme going on at the moment in terms of seagull behaviour?
So, Brian, Mark and Alex, the question I want to ask is, what is going through the mind of a BBC presenter that is asking about extremist seagulls? Jonathan is a nice name for a seagull. There's one famous seagull called Jonathan. Are we talking about Jihadi Jonathan here? What is going on, Brian, that the word extreme is linked to behaviour of seagulls in the 21st century?
Well, Mike, very quickly, with an eye on the clock, I think that what we're watching now is an actual breakdown of the cognitive process of our MPs. They are simply devoid of reality. We could be discussing the breakdown of the NHS. We could be talking about the disaster that's been unfolded in Syria. We could talk about people with no jobs, people sleeping on the streets. But we've got MPs, grown men, talking about hedgehogs as if they were still their little cuddly toy. That's Oliver Colville. And now we're talking about seagulls. If you talk to the average person who spent some time at sea, which I have, seagulls are very big birds. They're very aggressive, and they can be very aggressive when they land on ships. So there's been no change in behaviour of seagulls. Seagulls will go wherever the food is, and if you've got a nice bag of chips and they're near you, they're going to go for the chips. So they're not armed. There's no jihadi seagulls. I haven't seen any trailing black banners behind them as they fly around the sky. We are watching complete breakdown of Westminster here.
Yeah, Westminster and media personnel, Alex.
I think so, and I can see that Mark wants to come in here, so I'll just keep it brief. I'm of the generation of counterterrorism officers who remember that everyone who was called extremist or jihadi had to have a kunya, a fake Arabic nom de guerre, a war name. And typically, if you were a Scot, for example, and converted to jihadism, you got the moniker of Al Scotlandi. And if you came from the Netherlands, you were known to your new comrades as Al Hollandi. Well, it seems that we have some extremists called Albatrossi running around at the moment.
Okay.
Well, can I just stick up for albatrosses there, because wonderful birds, territorial, I believe, even at sea. So I think that might be a bit unkind, but I take your point.
Mark.
What it boils down to is don't feed the birds. There's seagulls in America too, and what causes them to be aggressive is to, a lot of people have a tendency to feed the birds. You just don't feed the birds. Yeah, this is a clear misallocation of priorities at its base. I mean, they need to discuss the things that really matter. Seagulls will be seagulls. Just don't feed them, don't encourage them, and get on with the business of state that really matters.
Yeah, and more to the point, don't get rid of your fishing industry. Give them something else to do.
There you go.
Well, I'm just going to emphasise the point. This was an email that I sent to Oliver Colville back in, I think it was May 2015, when the government was casually saying, well, we've killed a couple of people. They've been droned to death. We didn't bother to establish whether they were terrorists. We didn't bring them into a court. We didn't have any evidence against them. We just killed them. And basically, I said to Mr. Colville, did you see the evidence against these people? And what did I get? No reply. So we've got a man not interested in the deaths of human beings, but he's busy talking to the local paper, saying how he remembers his mummy giving him a cuddly, presumably knitted hedgehog.
Yes. Right. Well, look, we're rapidly running out of time. Mark, let's get back on the more serious issues. This is from the Truth Hound, from your own website. Like with 9/11, news documentaries on Oklahoma City, Waco, Ruby Ridge seek to squelch dissent. What are you writing about here?
Reinforce the government big media narrative, and that is that the people that were accused of these crimes are the only ones who could ever be accused. There could not possibly have been any accomplices. Everything you've been told over the last couple of decades is true. There's nothing to see here. There's nothing to question. And there's this ongoing domestic terrorist, right-wing, white supremacist menace stalking the great fruited plain of America. And Timothy McVeigh, who was convicted and executed for Oklahoma City, they've also decided that he had no real meaningful accomplices, although there used to be John Doe number 2. They figured out a way to explain that away without a good, proper analysis. But Timothy McVeigh becomes the face of white right-wing terror. And so we have this PBS show, American Experience, carrying on the propaganda, the reinforcement that's part of the broader range goal of fake news. And that is to always repeat the same official narrative. Then it goes in our school textbooks, in our history books. The cement dries, it becomes this permanent narrative that thou shalt not question. And so last night on PBS was more of this reinforcement, and my article on thetruthhound.com points out in a lot of reasonable detail how they went about it and what they had to say on the show. And so they're covering Oklahoma City. They've also done one, American Experience, on Ruby Ridge, and on these other watershed moments. It's very troubling to see this same tired narrative being reinforced.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mark. And Alex, just probably to end the program, this is from Les Echo. And of course, right at the heart of the fake news agenda is Google and Facebook, because they are, of course, we've got to deal with fake news through social media. But what is this article alleging here? That they're going to take a direct or directly influence the upcoming French election?
That's right, Mike. Google and Facebook have pledged simultaneously to try out new, really beta testing tools on the French people. And the article in French describes how each of these American giants of the internet, as the article calls them, have been working on a tool for a while, and now they've made it available in French and for the French context. And they're going to switch it on now, and they're going to keep it on until after the French election and then switch it off again. The Google test is described by a spokeswoman who says, if this is successful, we will be using it further afield. So that very much is playing guinea pigs with the French electorate. But nevertheless, the French business paper Les Echos begins the article rather unthinkingly by saying, fake news is public enemy number one since it interfered with the US election. Okay. And this is not interfering with the US election, apparently.
Right. Well, this is pretty significant if that's what they're up to. Where does it end? And I suppose it really highlights the danger that we have in because we've effectively created, with all the freedom that we have on the internet, nonetheless, through our choices of which platforms we use, we've effectively created monopolies, which means that if those monopolies then decide to behave in a particular way, that has a direct influence on what we see and what we have available to us. So we're effectively, by using these companies, self-censoring.
I think that's right, Mike. You've identified it there. We have been given something free and infinite in its possibilities, the internet, and we, by our mass herd behaviour, have allowed these monopolies to form. I think it was Benjamin Franklin who told a questioner at the one of the conventions for the public held at the time of the US Declaration of Independence. He said, "Sir, we have given you a republic if you can keep it." I think that the framers of the internet could now say to us with just cause, we have given you an internet if you can keep it. You know, if we're too lazy to use alternatives to Google and Facebook, this is going to happen. And it's got to the stage now, a generation after the internet mainstreamed, that the French, just following the Americans here, can say, we rely on the goodwill of the media and the public spiritedness of readers to alert us to fake news. So we're actually building our own cage, aren't we?
Yes. Mark, thoughts?
It's heartening to see that the discussion topic here is talking about that they fear that the U.S. election was interfered with by the new news narratives out there, which includes what we put out there. What they're basically saying or fearing is that, oh my gosh, that someone interfered with the election. Hillary Clinton did not get elected. Donald Trump did. We've got these interlopers interfering with the ongoing narrative of the establishment. And so it's more proof positive that we're doing the right thing. And Richard Haas, that we mentioned earlier, and his trepidation at the use of certain words that are alerting the public what's going on. That item about him and this item that you're showing now are both indicative that the walls are crumbling on the information ministries that have been monopolizing the narrative for way too long, telling us what our history is, telling us what goes in our textbooks, telling us what these narratives are about Oklahoma City, that thou shalt not ever change the narrative. Well, guess what? They're going to change the narrative because we're changing it. And the internet, if we can keep it, is the primary means to do that.
Absolutely. Now, just before we go, Mark, just remind us what the Truthhound's domain is.
Oh, thetruthhound.com.
So it's thetruthhound.com. We were being asked in the chat box to give a reminder, so that's what it is. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you both very much for joining us. Just a couple of points. Somebody said in the chat box earlier that they'd rather feed the seagulls than the politicians. I would certainly agree with that. And of course, seagulls are a lot less dangerous than British politicians who are damaging a large number of people. We do understand that an elderly lady was hurt in one of the original seagull attacks. And we're not making light of that, but we are making light of the fact that our politicians should have far more serious things to deal with. And I'll also say we're aware that there's been some very unpleasant police action in Sheffield as a result of members of the Sheffield community trying to protect trees in their neighbourhood, which Sheffield City Council has suddenly decided they want to cut them down as part of presumably building their sort of global city-state empire. We hope to have some video footage and comment from people on the ground in the next couple of days on that. So that's it from us. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll be back at the same time tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.